Thank you very much, and to my dear friends here, from Bob to Dom to Gary, who I live with, and Jeanette, who's a colleague, and to those two beautiful people over there that I spend many meals with. Look, it's an absolute pleasure for me. I love doing this sort of thing. What I want to do today is just paint a picture of not my life, it's not about me, it's about this region. And I want to be really engaging. Also and it's really tricky, I never sit on the fence with anything, I try not to. I understand a whole lot of political correctness in this world that we live in. I was, for instance, this morning, just got back from Adelaide, and there was a lady who, I won't say who she works for, but she said the word blackfellow. That's how I grew up. And she was yelled at and screamed at, saying, don't use that, it's First Peoples, or it's traditional owners, or it's the Indigenous people. And I've watched this for 20 years. Every year there's a new name tag for our people. And I've been sort of against that new tag because I like continuity. And I don't mean this in disrespect. I want this to be a very open and engaging yarn, because that's what it's supposed to be. So I might just leave it at that, but you know, we respect each other. I think you know where I'm coming from. It's about that balance, and I like to be in that balance zone. So this is me this morning, coming out of Adelaide. And you know, when you're up in the hills coming out of Sudan, sounds romantic. I've been in Sudan this morning. But this is Sudan, South Australia, I can assure you. But coming out off that rise, that mountainscape, and then you just see this huge flatness like the Morgan Plain, and then that's reaching back to this country. And that to me is sort of like, when I'm away from here, I'm always here as well. That's how we think as Aboriginal people. Well, not all, we don't all think the same. That's how I think, and that's how I've been brought up to think. So my spirit's very much in this landscape. And it's in this landscape because of, as we all know, we have to come from somewhere. These are my people that were just south of Mildura. And all these people, they're my grandfathers, my great-grandmothers, my great-great-grandfathers, my grandmother, my great-uncles, and they've all obviously got names, but I'm not going to go through those names. For instance, the lady in the middle where the hand is now, that's the lady from here. That's the lady from here, for a Nyeri woman. And this is my great-great-great-grandfather who married her, who was Archibald Albucature, and Archibald Pepper. Albucature is my grandfather's lake that's named after him. He's a Pelican man. So these people are from here, and they go from Swan Hill, which is Wamba, Wergaia, which is out in the Sunset Country, up into Nyeri, which is around these parts here. So this is my great-grandfather, and that's his daughter, my grandmother, and that's my great-grandmother. And when you get into this, we've got stories that actually come directly from there, and they're traditional stories, and they're the stories that we are really, really hungry to share with this community because they belong to you. And thanks, Dean, for that acknowledgement to country. But what's really important is acknowledging you people about wanting to know more. And it's not knowing more just being here today. I know these people that are sitting in this room, and I acknowledge you guys of your commitment to Aboriginal issues, archaeology, whatever it is in this region. And it's really important to do that. I was with some dear friends the other day, and getting back to this political correctness, they were saying how they wanted to say things, but they couldn't say anything because what's happened is going from being killed, poisoned, raped, and saved by non-Aboriginal people. So there's that whole field there, but we've gone to this other end where it's like we're protected in this bell jar where you can't walk down the street and have a comment. I'm really against that. I really don't like that. I think that's not community. And I've watched it evolve over my lifetime and more recently. And it's really important. The two three people that I really respect were scared to sort of say things. And I said to them, you really need to just grow up and shut up. What it was I was quite angry at them because I think it's time for them to stand up. And they've committed, I know them, they've committed their whole life to a lot of issues around our people. So it's really important to acknowledge that. And I don't want to sound like I just want to be really open about how I think. And I think it's really important to do that. I don't want to bang on about this too much, but what I really want to do is to say this is where I sit in the world, and that world is really precious to me because I think the other is so destructive. If you can't have a conversation, there's no point in dealing with the issue. Like if you're non-Aboriginal, you get shut down, or if you're a real grassroots Aboriginal person, and then someone else is in the, they've got a job at the state level at the highest thing and they go, I'm against them. You shouldn't talk because you're not at grassroots. Well, I know a lot of grassroots people that shouldn't be at grassroots, is what I'm saying. Yeah, shouldn't be talking. So where that goes, I don't know, but we'll move on a bit. So these are my people, and these are the people that the stories come down from where I come from, around here. And it's very special, and this goes back at the moment where the dates are like 33,000 years, which is a long time, like in the world of peopling the world or however you see it. But this region, we're doing it about 33,000 years. What's really important about that 33,000 years is it's, for a lot of our people, it doesn't really matter. It's just, it goes on till, forever. Because we'd engaged 33,000 years, it didn't really matter. It's just this is always where we've been, always how we came here. Then there's the whole, I remember doing a survey many years ago with my own people about where do you think we come from? And a lot of the Aboriginal people were saying straight out they come from here because that's what they were taught in their culture, and that I totally respect it. I believe that, we come from here as evolved as a people, that we come from here, but also fully understand that we came out of Africa. But as our own culture, our ethos, this is where we come from. There's stories that come out of Lake Tyrrell, which swallow up this whole region, and those stories are really, really special. Some of those stories were passed down to us, but at the point of contact, there was a farmer who spent a lot of time with our people back then. And my point for saying that is it was really good that this was recorded back then, but you can't expect a group of people who have been displaced in many ways, like, from their way of functioning, to remember anything. You go to Italy and they're lucky to remember 4 grandfathers ago if they can, So I don't know why all these big pressures come on Aboriginal people to say, do you remember 40,000 years ago, or all this sort of stuff. So I'm a bit of a realist. But the other thing that's really important to me too is this, all across the world there's stories of little people, big people, giant animals, small animals. And I think that's through observations, because there were big animals here. And there were little animals here, and they're not myths. They're actually real. So these tales actually come out of observation. So you're not remembering, say, back in the last 20,000 years when we had megafauna or thereabouts. You're not remembering, but you've also got to remember that people coming across the skeletons of these things. They're walking around and they're actually like, wow, what's that? They actually get to see that and think, wow, or a burial that's eroded out with some sort of natural erosion through a water cut and someone's really quite long. For instance, Lake Benini has some people up there that are about 6'5", and that's quite tall for today, and also for back then, it's very tall. and we look at some families that live in this region, like Kutcher Edwards, for instance. Like, Kutcher's not the biggest person in his family, believe me. You know, there's other big people, and that gene pool is huge. Just on that, there was a guy called Benabil when we grew up with the story of Benabil, which comes from not this tribe here, from great-great-grandma, but from a neighbouring one down, coming out of the, I think it might have been the Wergaia or the Wamba, but he was a giant when the white people first got here. And he was a threat to them, so they actually got his own group to go against him, and then they hunted him because they were really scared of him. So they hunted him into Garryword, Mount Zero of Garryword, down in Halls Gap area of Garryword, and he never came out, but they did trace some of his blood back there. So there's all these sort of yarns, and there's all these really rich histories, and one of the commitments that we do with, you know, you talk to the councillors and the mayors and teachers and all that, is we want to bring all that stuff back to here where it rightfully belongs, like the Blondowski material. When I was in the museum as a curator, it was really quite special because I got to know Blondowski through, he was basically a curator back in his time, pre the museum with the Geological Society of Victoria. And he worked with the Nyeri people. And then all of a sudden I'm finding myself sitting in basically in his seat many, many years later, from 1857, and when he was here in 56, 57, and when I was here in the, I don't know, 95 or 96 for about a decade, and then coming across his material, and then, you know, little things that sort of just blow you out. Like, he got here on the 30th of April, 1856, which is my birthday, and I'm thinking, oh, you know,
You're not that old.
yeah, no. So then his name is Wilhelm Theodor Blondowski, and my son's like Willem Theodore. You know, so these little things that you just, you know, it's sort of like, you know, you hear a word, something, and you think, what's that word? You ask the person, what's that word? And then you go, and then they tell you the meaning, and then you think, I've never heard that. And within 4 days, you hear it 5 times. You know, so it's where your brain's at. So I just always remember that sort of thing and put the two together. It's where your brain's at, so that's what you're thinking about, therefore you pay it attention. So that's those little things that you pay attention to, like when he got here on that day. So the archaeology of this region is huge on a national and an international level. It's actually, as my colleague here, Jeanette, has worked in the region as well for many years, would agree with. I work a lot over around Australia, not all of Australia. I don't work in the West much, but I think I'm going over there next week to be out in the desert. But wherever I go in Australia, this was my training ground in many ways, but it still keeps teaching me. Like, an old spiritual teacher of mine said, you could live 3 lifetimes and you won't see half of what this has to offer. And I think it's very true. We're constantly seeing things here that are phenomenal, from jewellery to artificial deformation of the crania, which is where they're changing the crania, as in by kneading it, basically. Those that are into plants, when you do espalier and stuff like that with trees, you can do the same with bone. Bone's like wood. Or you can do 2 planks, and you see the Venezuelans with their long skulls. Well, we've got those out on our burial sites. A brother and a sister buried together, and they had cranias that were deformed, artificially deformed. I don't mean deformed like, you know, deformed, but they were changed. Jewellery, you know, there was a person here who was speared. I don't know what he had done, looked at someone's wife wrongly, or done something really bad to an elder, whatever it was, I don't know. but he copped a fish spear, those boned fish, three-pronged fish spears in the middle of his lower back. And by the time we saw him, he's obviously bone, and the three prongs survived, and the shaft had either broken or it just eroded away. So there's another thing that I don't agree with in my time, is about us being the greatest conservationists of the world. We're a hunter-gatherer society. We weren't into metal, we weren't into polluting chemicals in the river. We lived with our Mother Earth, so we didn't have that poisons that go into the landscape, or the clearing. We cleared through fire burning, which you all know, and this is why I want this conversation to go away from what we know and get into not so much what we don't know, but I don't want to sit here and give you rhetoric, right? I want to open this up into what is good. So I don't believe, the things that I don't believe in is the greatest conservation, because it compares the modern world with what we were doing back then, and I just can't do that. The other thing about being, we're also gentle and kind and sharing is, like, I've looked at skeletons for over 2-3 decades, and I can tell you right now, when we go to war, we go to war. Like, we go to war. Like, I'm serious. Like, it's those clubs that you see with all the jagged mallee root edges on them that are prickly and all that, those war clubs and the shields and the boomerangs, and I've seen what they do to the bone of our ancestors, and it's not pretty. Yeah. Disease, health, I've seen people that look like Olympic runners in their skeletal material, like healthy, beautiful shiny teeth, and I've seen other people with abscesses from a decaying tooth. With our diet, we have a lot of soil in our diet, so that's like silica. This sand is like silica, which is glass. It roads down the dentine, and it'll get into it'll just wear it right away. So you're basically going to raw tooth, or tooth's gone. The plane of the tooth's gone, and then abscesses can set in. You can see where people have been sticking a stick to bleed it and then suck it out, like we've all done as a kid when you've had a bit of a sore in your gum. Stick it and suck the blood out, you can actually feel it. Well, some people didn't, they even took the tooth out, but it was too late, and I've seen like half of a mandible being eaten away. We had diseases such as yours, like syphilis. We've had stresses that you can see in the skeleton through looking at it, things called cribra orbitalia, where you get this pitting of the orbits in the eye sockets, and that's due to things like nutrition. You've got, you're living in peaceful times. Just because I said we're at war doesn't mean we're always at war. We had beautiful peaceful times as well. Huge ceremonies like out at Wentworth, where Jeanette works a lot. There were people coming from hundreds of kilometres coming to those beautiful places. But I really want to stress that this fable that everyone says we're the best conservationists and we were healthy people, we were very sick people, we were very healthy people. We're unlike anyone else in the world. We're the same as everyone. We just live in a different space, and we are our own people. And what we have in this region is very, very unique. We're not the same as the coastal people. We're not the same as the arid desert people or the people over in WA. So these people are who I'm from, part of this community. Which is this beautiful space, this Mildura, our region as our municipality dictates to us. And within that is, you can see all the lakes, and like seriously, these lakes, and this is all life-giving. There's Tyrrell, there's Albuquerque, where my great-grandfather's lake is, that Sunset Country as you know it, all that system going up to Travellers Lake, Mungo, Poppleton and all that. This is life-giving, the Darling. We all know this because we live here. We know that it's life-giving. And that Darling River Junction.
Mark, would people travel that that be out of the question, or is
Not at all. Not at all. With the diaries of Goodwin, who was the missionary over in Yalta, he's got 10 volumes, and that's the sort of, his volumes are so easy to read. They're 10 short volumes of his time there, Ian, right? And he went for a trip with some local people. I don't know whether they're Marrawara, Barkindji or Nyeri, but he took a couple of, but they went up the Darling and they got about 700, I think it was mile, not kilometres, I could be wrong. It's either miles or kilometres. One's greater than the other, as we know, but it was 700. And they got to a point where they were doing sign language, and then they got to a point where they just said, like, this is just too far. It's just too far. We're going home. But at that extremity is about also what encapsulates those big ceremonies like the, I don't like to compare, but it's basically the Murray-Darling Junction Olympics, where people just came. You know, they just came. So it's not unheard of for people to move, and to think that you could actually walk from here to say Albuquerque in about, you know, at a nice groovy pace in about 3 or 4 days. Yeah, which is not too bad. You know, you get from here to Swan Hill in less than a week, you know, and you think there's places that you can stop along, you can see people. And I know I jump all over the place, and it's good that I do in some ways, but some people say it's really hard to follow me sometimes. I've had that said to me many times, but I think if you're going to dabble in this stuff, you really want to paint a picture of everything rather than, you know, just give something about this is what I learnt from stone tools. My head sits in a space where I've read all these journals as the curator at the Museum of Victoria for however long it was well over 6 years, but the reading that's available in those institutions is incredible, like the Board of Protection of Aboriginals, Masola's journals, the Goodwin's papers, and all of a sudden you just have this head that just fills up. And I think if you can share those, not share it out of my mouth, if you give the people the resources that they can play with it and they can guide themselves through it, but without the resources, you're walking around blind. And I think in today's age, to do that, if you want to learn, is really sad when that material is sitting there. The Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, all their material should be in each region, so they've got it. Somebody said to me the other day, well, just get people to be a member of those institutions.
Is that what it will take?
No, well, it might take that. It might take that, Ian, but it might take that to do it. But I think that's an unfair way of making a community progress. I think you do stuff like you drag it in, because it can come like that. And I'm sure Mildura City Council, when you notice that, I'm sure, the Mildura City Council's database or their computer thing would have enough megabytes, whatever you want to call it, to house stuff that you could drag in. So teachers have it, historians have it, the Writers' Festival, when they come here, they can have access to it. And if there's stuff that's secret sacred, it doesn't have to, it can sit in a little private box somewhere. But out of all my readings and talks and people that have taught me and colleagues and that, I don't see much secret sacred stuff. It's there, but the amount of it can be locked away. But the greater thing you've got to remember is there's over 80% that can be shared, where people can get a lot of information and they can actually learn. And there's a lot of studies that have been done here as well. There was some Mildura Anthropological Society. These guys are mad, you know. I remember reading their journals. They're out sort of at I think it was Lake Populta on the 24th of December. You know, the day before Christmas. You know, these people just went everywhere, and they just looked and looked and looked and did their stuff. I've also got, I'm reversing the, well, look, we'll just stay with this for a bit. Those areas, there's Walpolla Island, and you can see The landscape's constantly changing. I don't know if we can blow that up more. Yeah, you can see here, there's the width of the river, and see that white line, it's sort of like an overlay line of our present day river. That's thicker than the actual river. The river's smaller than that white line. But you look over here at this oxbow, it's about 3 or 4 times bigger than that present river. That's the old river, that's the parent river to this river. So the river's been migrating south for over 20,000 years. And these rivers were much wider, so this landscape's constantly changing. So if you had one group of people on one side of the river, which this river dictates that, between Swan Hill and the South Australian border, there's only 2 areas that I know of that jump the river. All the other tribes, they come up and they butt up against the river. Yeah?
Is that because it was a good boundary?
Exactly, exactly. And the other thing is, if you're angry with someone and you're swimming over to tell them off, they can just throw rocks at you while you're swimming. So this all comes back to sort of common sense, and this is what everyone does, is they actually operate, so it's really a lot on common sense. And through common sense, rules get made, and then you.
Why the river's heading south?
It gets bored. It just gets bored.
No, it's in the southern entrance, getting heavy.
Yeah.
Well, like the Mungo Channel, like the Mungo coming out of Box Creek up near Balranald, that's dried up, right? And then, so there is a migration. It is slowly migrating south. Yeah.
So it's just a slow erosion, sort of gradually, there's less and less, billabongs on the new south.
Here's a good example. It is exactly, the cut out at Kawana Bend? There you go. There's an oxbow just about to be made. There's one of those loops just about to be evolving. When that cut comes through, and it really does come through at a different rate, opens that part of the river up, pushes soil. So you go like this, the river's going like that, it'll dump soil on one side, won't on the other side. It just...
There's another factor as well, and that's climate change in the long term, where the amount of discharge varies from a lot of discharge to very little. So the big discharge cuts a really big river, dumps a lot of sand.
That's it.
The discharge drops,
Ever-changing.
the river sand gets blocked up, and then the next time it rains a lot and a new discharge, the river can't cut through, and it cuts a new channel. That's what happened. And then you sometimes get lakes form, like at the Wamba.
And sandbars that disappear and they end up on the other side
And
of the river.
people data these, and you can actually, once you've got your sort of eye into it, you can kind of have a guess at the sequence of low flow, high flow, low flow, depending on where they are in the landscape.
Then there's the Cadell Fault. The Cadell Fault up in Barmer, comes around and then, a bit of an uplift. And the story there is that the Yorta a lady, I've read a story where the lady actually made the new river through a digging stick. She just cut a part in when it was going this way, and as Jeanette's saying, the big rush is coming out, and she actually guided the new part of that Barmer choke.
We have the most really dramatic example in this area, which everybody locally should know, but probably doesn't, is that the Darling River, south of, say, Pooncarry or south of Menindee, is very young. It's less than 10,000 years old. And the Darling used to flow down the Anna Branch, and if you go and look at the Anna Branch, it's all sanded up. It was a massive river, and you could tell by the bends that we got. Little bends means little discharge, big bends. And there are sand dunes in the old riverbank beds up the Anna Branch, no longer water in naturally, which are 15,000 years old. So they're all built up at the end of the last ice age. And then after that, in the last 10,000 years, more water comes. And it can't go down the Anna Branch anymore, so it cuts a whole new channel.
Cuts a new channel. Warlock.
That's
And
why
so
it's
archaeological sites on the Anna Branch
I get it.
are
And they're evolving.
10,000, 20,000. Archaeological sites on the Lower Darling are 4,000 or 5,000.
Yeah. Warlock Reserve, that big oxbow in there, that's the old river channel. And as Jeanette's just said, it'll silt up. And then on the other side of that, near places like psychic pumps in the old channel, because all those sandbars are just broken down soils right up in the mountains. There's sandbars that came out really quick on the inside of psychic pumps, not the pump station, upstream. There's like sugar cubes, you know, the sugar cubes you get, the brown sugar cubes for coffee that are square. There's sandbars that have got square sand nodules versus the other fine grained sand. So it's just all this sorting that happens, and as Jeanette said, the soils will tell you a lot. And it's really easy to grasp. It's like if you want to learn about dinosaurs, pick up a kid's book about dinosaurs. That's how I learned about Triceratops, Brachiosaurus and stuff. This needs to be done in the same way, because everyone says it's really hard to get your head around. You can actually explain this stuff really simple through really short paragraphs, and this is what the kids of this region need, because they've got a beautiful Aboriginal history, they've got a beautiful geological history and geomorphological history. They've got a great history post-contact, and if you don't make this stuff available, they don't learn, or if you make it complex or hard to get to grab, it's really quite difficult to play with it. We were, just to change it around a bit, you know, there's the ceremonies that we do. This was a photograph of, it actually turned out beautiful, this photograph last week, of working on a burial site. It was, part of our thing is to cleanse the material, just like they do it with the Roman Catholic churches, do it with their, this is what I'm saying, we're no different. The similarities, we're more similar to the rest of the world than we are different, yeah? And everybody treats it like it's a special case. It's special in a certain degree, like everything is special all across the world is special to that place. And what we see as special is these sort of ceremonies, really important. I'm going to show some stone tools and some skeletal material. If anyone doesn't want to see some skeletal material, I'm happy not to show it. I don't have a problem with it. I know some of my colleagues have a problem with it. I know some of my Aboriginal people have a problem with it, but I don't have a problem with it. If you don't get to expose to it, it's like it's in the cupboard, and there's some stuff that I want to talk about in the cupboard that'll stay in the cupboard unless you treat it and you feel safe. Point being, an old man, who I won't mention his name, but you know, he's getting up in age, and he was working in a quarry on one of our burial sites, and he's had a skeleton in his closet for a long time, and he doesn't want to die with it in the closet. He wants it to go back. So unless people are feeling safe, they're not going to engage. You know, they're just not going to. And if you make people feel safe and beautiful and comfortable and relaxed, they will engage. So it's a very controversial issue, the skeletal material. I work on our old people's remains, and I find a lot of information from that. For instance, we can do things that you read about, women doing one thing, men doing another thing. We can actually see proof where women are actually doing a chore, where the men aren't. For instance, collecting mussel shells by diving into the water was more done in this particular part of the world, more so by women than men. And we can tell that through the skeleton. It's a very simple thing. It's called auditory exostosis, which is a bone growth in your ear. Surfers get it because they surf in cold water. And what happens is the bone just starts laying down more bone in the auditory space, your ear hole, and that does that to stop the gushing of the water coming in. So it's just your body doing it. We found it more prevalent in women than men. It was much more in women and very less in men. They're the little things that we can tell. This is not unlike, this is a man, not from this country, he's Woiwurrung, but you know, you've seen all the pictures of the Nyeri football and all this sort of stuff. This is very, you know, very indicative of a lot of groups around Victoria, and I just wanted to use this image.
Which part of the state?
Oh, Wergaia, up towards around Melbourne. Yeah, within, well, Melbourne being Wurundjeri, but it's within that area. And you can see things like here, like the dots on the leg, you know, like quoll. You know, we're learning things like this is the dots of a quoll. And then these other things, they're actually real patterns. They relate. They're not just there for, as you'd imagine, they're not there for just to make a shape. They actually have meaning, as all body markings do, scarification, body painting when we go to ceremony. There's our beautiful, I did a lot of work on lithics here in Victoria, especially around here. They were saying that when I first started looking at, because I was doing a lot of looking at all the burial sites from the South Australian border through to basically Swan Hill, constantly, more so to Hatter, in the very tight thing in the 80s. So Lake Walla Walla, you know, all these areas, and there's big burial sites here, massive. And not the biggest I've seen. There's just over the South Australian border, places like there was another big one at Lake Merity, which was huge, absolutely massive as well. And these places need protecting. So when I decided I was going to go to uni, I said that I had to pick a thesis to do to become an archaeologist. So I thought, I know a fair bit about the old people's remains, their bone, so I decided to do stone, because I thought that'd be a good thing to do. So I looked at stone, and then the Gallus, when they were going to put in the Chowilla Dam, they had a big study here for flora, fauna, Aboriginal, geological, and it was a really good memoirs that they produced. I think it's memoir 26 out of the museum's memoirs, off memory. And then, so I thought I'd look at stone, and so we discovered everyone, and I don't know how you feel about it, but as soon as an archaeologist says to me, oh, it was imported, the stone was imported to this region, I really don't want to talk to them. You know, I really don't want to talk to them because they put it into the trade aspect, yeah? So they put it into the trade aspect. It's just lazy archaeology. I work all over Australia and I chase silkreed, and everywhere I go I find quarries. So we found a quarry, a colleague of mine who I learnt about the skeletal material, Dr. Colin Pardo, who's a dear colleague, and we're looking at all this stone while we're doing the burial sites, and it's like you have, and they're all saying, oh, it comes from over in the Flinders Ranges, and I'm thinking, so that's the good stuff, yeah? So this is the good stone. And then on the side of the good stone, like it's 400 k's or a good 300k walk, on the side of the good stone, there's this yucky stuff that you wouldn't use for anything. So you'd actually flick that off so you can carry more good stone. And that just didn't make sense with me. So that's when we sort of started thinking like that. And one day we came across the Berribee Silkreed quarry, which is what I studied. We found it. So we turned the stone quarries upside down, not only here, but through my studies, turned it upside down as far as the valleys going through the Central Highlands of Queensland. So if an archaeologist, you ever have one over for dinner and says the stone's imported, take your plate off them and tell them they can go and eat with the dog. So, moving right along. So I did a lot with stone, and that was fun.
But wouldn't they trade, you know, stone items as well, surely, you know,
Yeah, look, there's a bit of, like the Mount William stone axes are really well traded. They're the axes, and they were prized, like I mean, seriously prized. Don't want to sound sexist, but I've read records, and I'm not sexist, these are the records, where observations had it, the one stone axe was worth, you know, you could exchange it for women, right? And it's nothing to do with, you know, that whole, whatever, however you're thinking in your head, this is just the laws back then. And they were very prized. A Wamba guy who we used to trade reed spears from the river to them. So trade actually does happen. But with trade comes a commitment. for instance. So where this Berribee quarry is up near Ned's Corner way, right, I used one transect down the river, like linear along the river, and then I used another transect, which wasn't a transect, but exponentially going out to the Mallee, and I traced all these stones and took over, something like 800,000 measurements, whatever it was. There's 12 attributes to each stone tool that I was taking. Graphed and played with them, and it came up with some stuff which we'll have a look at in a minute. Also, there's a prize, there's a reversal. Instead of white people giving Aboriginal people alcohol, I've actually got, because I just got back from the Clare Valley, the Barossa Valley, I've got a prize for the best participant. So you might want to try and catch up to Smythe here. So the stone, the trade, so they're taking that, what I found with my studies is you get up to about Yalta and it drops off. The stone drops off in Hattah. Like there's not much stone in Hattah, stone tools. And that's because there's an obligation where people can say, like in Asia, they have this sort of no stone in Asia. And they found out they ended up calling it the bamboo culture because they could make spears, they didn't need spearheads. You just shape a piece of bamboo and it'll go through. So for some reason, the stone just dropped off at about Yalta and it just is like that all the way to basically the Vinifera forest. However, you go out towards Oyen, and you get a change in stone. You're still getting this sort of silkrete, all right? Which there's more than one of these quarries of silkrete up on the river at the Murray. It goes right through the Murray-Darling Basin, and that's how it's formed. So to paint your picture about why people do and don't do trade, I was in Hall's Gap once, Mount Zero, and I'm sitting there at Mount Zero, and I'm thinking, if my country's got beautiful stone and there's an uplift here, that reef of silkrete, that layer of silkrete should be in the uplift, right? So I went walking around Mount Zero and there's this beautiful band of silkrete and people were extracting it vertical. It's a vertical quarry, yeah? This is really important because that's high quality silkrete. In the middle of Garryword, there's another silkrete, less than half the quality of the good silkrete at the other end. And that was at Lake Bell or something it's called in the middle of Garryword. Belfield, thank you. And that has a much lesser silkrete, but the people are sitting there going, well, we'll just use our lesser silkrete. Instead of having been obliged to you, we'll just use our lesser silkrete. Have a nice day. And I think there's a lot of learning in there for that, yeah? You can see the expression of my grandmother. This is at a native title meeting on the shores of Lake Boga. She's dear to me. She passed away, my dear Mimi, we call her, which was her mother's name for up this way. It was Mimi. Not like the Mimi spirit, but like pronunciation always gets slapped around. Mima, Mimi. But anyway, that's my Mimi, my grandmother, my direct grandmother, my father's mother. You can see the expression on her face. This is dealing with native title. This went on for, this is now nearly 30 years old. And she passed, she didn't get to see it. I want to take this look off my people's face. I'm bored with it. I've had it up to the back teeth. I really have. It's just boring. It just goes on. It's like lawyers, guns and money. It's just, the research is pathetic. And it's putting people, and it gets back to that other thing, let the Aboriginal community work out themselves what's going on. Well, I can tell you in our community, we've got some people that aren't very good at what they do, right across the country. And you've got people that are leaving our elders with these looks on their faces, and I really don't like that because I think we're better than that. It gets back to the non-Aboriginal people, shut up, it's not your business. I think everyone's got a say on this because it affects you guys as well.
It seems to be happening a fair bit with this Mungo situation, doesn't it? These people aren't talking to these people. In the meantime, there could be some wonderful opportunities with the replacement of those items
Right.
for future generations instead of.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. You to mention Mungo, right, which is not my area, is like there'd be a lot of people saying, how dare you even comment on it? Yeah, I'm serious.
It's fallen in the papers all the time.
Well, mate, showing skeletons, they say you shouldn't do it, but you can get on your phone right now and actually see Mungo Man. You'll be able to get it up within 2 seconds. Yeah, 2 seconds, it'll come up.
It was front page of the paper only a few weeks ago.
All right. Well, Mungo's a different story. You know, they've just had a beautiful cultural centre built over in the people that make the stone huts. You know, they just got World Heritage listing. A colleague of mine, Damien Bell, and his family, and his tribal group, you know, fought very hard, and they've got a beautiful building. The Mungo, you know, my view of Mungo is it's a beautiful landscape. It belongs to the region, and my view is the, you know, and I won't go on about it, but you know, that the facilities up there are like as, you know, they're like pickers' huts here. It's just, I really aren't impressed with what happens at Mungo at all. You know, the people I know up there are beautiful people, but you know, the facilities for a World Heritage area is really quite pathetic.
Well, but is that what you believe should happen?
What?
You know, with the, you know, because I think, you know, the benefits of exposing these artefacts in the correct facility where everyone's happy. I think there's obviously.
Oh, you're talking about burial versus non-burial?
Yeah.
Ah,
exactly.
right. Well, that issue's been going on. That issue's been going on since I was a pup. You know, seriously.
50 years now, I don't think it's all.
But there's an opportunity there, I think, for students and the Australian, the global population in general, to be able to.
One thing that
see
poised.
these things. You know, so I would think it's a great opportunity for those people.
Yeah.
All of them.
I think the thing that plagues Aboriginal Australia is that people don't make decisions and they just leave it and they say it's too sensitive, too sacred, and you go back to the people that do it, yeah? They're in charge of their own culture. I believe in that very much, being in charge of your own culture. I really do believe it. It's like I wouldn't go and tell, you know, Mrs. Scopoletti how to make tomatoes pasta sauce, you know, I wouldn't dare, you know, but... Well, it's just these cultural things, you know, and it's just what you should do. And then I think what happens, it divides more than brings people together. The thing is when you get an argument that's gone on for over 30 years, and Mungo's not the only place that suffers from that. Like, you know, this place, and I'll say it openly, Mildura's got a real problem with who's the traditional owners. Like, if you can't work that out over all these decades, and you're wondering why you got disruption when it comes to the Aboriginal community and that. And look, I'm a traditional owner within this region. I'm not going to go and put my finger and say this, this and this on film. I don't mind doing it. I know what I am. But the thing is prolonged arguments don't give you a way forward. And it's sickening to watch. The other thing is, the traditional owner thing is, there's people that have lived here their whole life. They belong to this community, Aboriginal people, yeah? And then they get ostracised because they're not a traditional owner. I really want to, you know, through the people that you've met on this film, is to look after their burial sites. That's my number one job. That's what my family tells me I must do, yeah? I want to be involved in those conversations. The other thing is, that's at the high level burial site. That's the big end of town, yeah? But how you function as a community in this big end of town, in actually living, is there's some people here, and I won't name them, but they're neighbours to here, and they live here. You know, they live in this community, and it's really important that they don't feel like that they're tiptoeing. You know, you should be walking around Mildura, black and white, putting your foot on the ground and feeling good, you know, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's a mental decision to make. And I think we're at the time for Mildura, and I'm going to stop and I want some other people to talk, but I think we're at a time in Mildura where we can evolve and teach a lot of different other towns and cities around Australia about how to function. We have some very smart people in the arts, science, in the quasi-government, in government institutions, health of the river care, all this sort of stuff. And it's really important that we I reckon it's always start or stop. With Aboriginal people, it's always the first person to do this or the last person to do this. There's this whole thing in the middle, and we need to grab that whole thing in the middle and start celebrating that in this town. There's two things. If we don't start doing it in a very positive way, we're going to just keep going along the way we have been travelling. And that abscess, if I can use that abscess again, it's not going to get repaired. It's just going to get pussier, and it's just going to get filthier, and it's just not going to be to anyone's benefit at all. Just make it healthy and relax with it. And there's got to be decisions on both sides, you know. And I'm not using black on this side and white on this side. I'm talking about, as a whole, this community needs to grow up in many ways. And I don't mean that detrimentally or as like threatening. It just needs to go to the next level. And I think conversations need to start happening around that space. I'm starting to sound like rhetoric, you know. We're all on a journey, and around that space is like, I just think we need to get on with it a bit, yeah.
Australians have always had trouble going.
Yeah.
Authority, you know, it's just there. We're still beholden to other things, other places and other people.
Yeah.
We've never really put it on ourselves.
Well,
It takes so long to get things done in Australia.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of opportunities for our people. You know, like I was a product of being able to go to uni because I was sponsored. You know, there's a lot of, this is what I'm saying, there's a lot of beauty. And when you know, like from the people like Daisy Bates or the Moravian missionaries that did it, like our people wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Moravian missionaries down south. We would have been wiped out, you know, even though we weren't real healthy when we were living there. There was all these diseases living in that environment on dirt floors and stuff, you know, like lots of different diseases. But these are the things we need to celebrate. And like this tree will fall over one day. So our landscape's really important to protect these sites. These are coming off the landscape, like in droves. These are the toolkits for seed grinding, and our landscape's covered in it. And there's, you know, it's about teaching people what the beauty of it is, or here's some material that comes out of a burial site that gets accidentally dug up. You can actually see the wear in the teeth there. You know, this is what I'm saying, and then you get abscesses. You know, and these are good. These are really. There's a lot of information in our old people's remains, but now being politically correct, like I said, like I'm sort of in it. How much trouble am I going to get in from the media because I've done this? I'm not going to get into trouble. I refuse to go down there. You can go and get Mungo, the most important skeleton that we have in this country, to a degree. You can get that on your phone, but we can't talk about this apparently. Well, this is my ancestor, I'm sharing it. But it sort of gets into that defensive thing. I just want that to just disappear, you know? I'm like I said, it's like singing the same song all the time. And you don't want to be doing that. The one in the closet, this is the man that lives in this region that was now 90. This is a female. She is been in the closet, and if he didn't share his information, this lady won't go back to where she comes from. You know, it just caught up with him. He's had it for 50 years, and he just wants to put her back. So he was going to take us out, and he's going to show us where she comes from, and then we'll be able to look at the rest of the area and say this is bigger than what you think it is, and we'll be able to protect it, or just say, oh my God, the quarry has just completely taken the whole lot away, and we'll have to deal with that. But unless people are feeling safe, like this is sad to me. This is sad, you know, like having these people. I went past a cemetery the other day, coming back from just from South Australia, and then I looked at a cemetery, and I could actually see in my mind, I could see the people, the non-Aboriginal people laying in the cemetery. So they would have been grave goods, whatever went into the cemetery, they would have been clothed and they were put to rest. And for some reason, because it's in a cemetery, it's supposed to have more meaning. And then so I'd take that and say, look, you can feel that, how they were put to rest. All our burial sites along the river, everything was put to rest like that. Like we've seen possum skin cloak pins where the possum skin's rotted away, but the cloak pin's still there. You see, they're buried with things. They're buried with like the last meals, you know, like the last meal, a bit of shell, or so. It's a really wild place, and I think, you know, we own it more than you guys. I truly believe that. Like we own it more than you. Just like Don owns the Grand more than I do. You know, like I can't just go in there and do what I want. Actually, he probably wouldn't mind if I went and caught a trip. But you know what I'm saying? But it gets to a point where you've got to have some ownership as well. You know, otherwise this is not going to work. Young people being proud of their culture. This young man worked with us out at Mervyn, and to work with him was truly beautiful. And you know what? It's more about the person, because this is only a few months ago. I can't even remember his name, but I look into his eyes and I remember how enthusiastic he was. If I thought about it, I'd probably still not remember it. But looking at his face, how enthusiastic, how hungry he was. And then the other thing that was really sad is to introduce them into it and then saying, oh, when can I learn some more? Well, it's like when we have another contract or it's your turn. You know, that's really unfair. You want to pick up the ones that are really interested and you want to develop them rather than just doing this, what I deem as this sharing around, oh, he had to go, she had to go, he had to go, it's now their turn, right? It's really, you really need to develop people, and you can't develop people doing it like that. I'm going to stop talking for a minute, completely. Completely.
Can I just pick up on your last comment about young people? One of the most frustrating things I've found in the work I've done is the difficulty of avenues. About 15 years ago, I did a contract surveying the project was developed with the Aboriginal community just across there in Bunty people, to use it as a training exercise for young people. And what I got the young people sort of 18 to 25 years old. And I designed it so that we would do a site survey. It was a survey of an area on the Australian River. And I devised recording forms and things, not the proper ones, but ones that you could use in the field. And then they had to write up their own reporting, and in groups of 3 or 4, they had to produce a report, and they got their name on it. And they loved it, they absolutely loved it. And I tried through, because it was a government-funded one, I tried through, how can we help these young people get more training? The government department, they funded this, well, it was song and dance, not interested. For years afterwards, I had those young people high-five me in the street in Wentworth when they saw me and come up and say, I'd still really love to go on in this field. What can I do?
Yeah.
I tried everything and I had great difficulty.
Well, I think it is exactly what I said, and I said I was going to shut up, but I can't help it. Is you need to. Not everyone's going to be a hairdresser, and not everyone's going to be a motor mechanic. So you need to really start concentrating on these people, and really develop them.
Along what I'm talking about, you mentioned the burial sites at Lake Victoria, but I think you gave a figure to the amount of people who were buried there. Does that ring a bell to you?
Probably not. Look,
It was quite large,
Yeah.
and I think that's a really sort of important point about the perceived transience with the way we were educated. Bruce Paxton was on about this, that there was no actual civilization, but there is, And so when you have a burial, as you mentioned before, burial for white people, and there would be large burial sites, which flies in the face of everything we've been taught about Indigenous Aboriginal people in this area, or pretty much across the country, that they actually were very established places, ceremonial places, burial places, and all this sort of stuff, and large numbers.
Yeah.
So I'm really talking about
The orientation.
Really shocked.
They're getting even orientation, where you're doing orientation for burials, and there's slight differences as you go along the river, but they're cemeteries. There's no doubt about it. They're actual cemeteries, and they're placed in like the head at the right way, and there's variation, but within the variation, there's 5 variations. All those 5 variations are very similar to each variation, and they just run out and they just keep doing it. Lots of them.
If you're interested, as the person who actually supervised the work of the local Lake Victoria during environmental impact, if you're interested, I can send you the component of the final EIS report on the numbers of people.
Yeah.
And one's faced with a moral dilemma sometimes. Yes, there are people buried there. We will never know how many.
No.
We can only make estimates depending on what we see eroded or what's excavated. However, and so we don't want to downplay. However, the quotes of 10,000 people that were in the newspapers in 1996 and 97, which actually probably in a roundabout way led to the big project that was there because there were so many people there, were based on an arithmetic error in a draft report that was never completed, and in a table, at the bottom of the table, one author in the draft says, who's typed this up, says, X, can you check these figures? I don't think they're right.
Were they exaggerated or are they?
It was an arithmetical error. It was based on, here is a sand dune, here is a scat with bones eroded on the surface. We did excavations and we found X number of people per square metre, and we multiplied that out.
Not only the numbers, but getting onto Janet's, that stuff should be centralised like an archaeological hub in this state, so in this part of the region, so you can get a hold of it and you can do that stuff. But not only is there burials, there's burials in trees, and they're wrapped in cloaks. There's a whole lot of things. There's platform burials out that have recorded out here, you know, like the old cowboy movies, where they go through and everyone's up on the platform. They're here. You know, there's men wearing feathers in their head like an Indian. And I'm not trying to compare. I'm just saying these shared things that are happening around.
A very good example from Lake Victoria. This is actually a burial ground that I recorded, and I was blown away.
Yeah.
Because we're not digging these up for the sake of digging them up. We're going out to an eroded lakeshore and seeing how things are disturbed, and so we're seeing them erode, excavated by the waves, and we're looking at protection works to stop any more happening.
Yeah.
Most of the burials there are interred with the body laid out, facing east, whatever. Sometimes multiple burials, two people together. A human and a dingo were buried in the same grave. But this particular little cemetery, I think we recorded something like 15 burials there, and the ones that we could see clearly, and that there was enough still remaining in position, they were bundle burials. That is, the skeleton had been, the body had been reduced to a skeleton previously, and they had been buried in a small bucket-shaped hole with all the long bones and the ribs and the skull placed on top. And the most likely thing is, because we know of the traditional ties between that area, this area of the Murray, down to South Australia, is that they were people who maybe died in South Australia, and the burial tradition in South Australia is to expose the bodies on platforms until the bodies are dried, and then bury them elsewhere in Australia as well. And our speculation was that this little burial ground was for people who died further downriver and whose remains have been brought back as skeletons.
Well, It's not a theory. It's happened. It's happened because you can see it. There's just multiple examples of
But
it.
to actually see it,
Yeah.
to walk onto the
Yeah.
site,
Yeah, and there they are.
the waves have removed the sand and do, oh my God,
Yeah.
wow.
A lot of people thought the cremations were people being burnt vindictively, but it's exactly that. They die away from country when they're away, and the best way to bring them home is to bring their ashes, basically take their ashes and put them back.
These weren't cremations.
Yeah, burials, yeah. So that clean bones, yeah.
But it was just amazing to see this.
Well, the thing is burials, as we know, they always go up to that upper echelon, they're always important, but the whole array, like there's jewellery, like Nyeri man, from Lake Nyeri, there's we've found jewellery out here made out of clay beads and things like that. So the society is huge, it's absolutely massive. It is absolutely massive, and it needs to be celebrated.
There's a sign of status where, they find, like in Siberia, they find all those beads, and it's about 30,000 years old. It was obviously a man who was very high status. And I think they found 2 kids too, who died, might have been their children. And they were very high status, like the workmanship, all the beads are obviously attached to clothes.
Yeah.
And, we're talking 30,000 years ago, which is evidence that that man and his family were esteemed in a high regard, had status. And of course, Anglo-Saxon burials were all, a whole lot of the same as that. They're buried with gold and everything, golden hoards. But do we have any of that where someone has been, that's a status?
Absolutely, yeah. There's ones that have come out of trees where a young girl, she's from the Jar Jar Rung community, and she was wrapped in a possum skin cloak plus a European dress. She had a men's headband buried with her, where you can still see the follicles of the man's headband in his headband, a heap of pegs for putting out to go into her afterlife, pegs to put skins out on bark, like wooden pegs. No, and this is what I'm saying, the society, these are their tools, buried both black and white. There's a guy out at, a male out at Lake Walla Walla, and ochre's fairly common around here, but you see red ochre bones, like the Greeks, how they wash them after they wash them, they coat them in ochre and whatever they do. Out here, there's a guy at Lake Walla Walla, he's laying on a bed of ochre about that deep by about that thick by about that long. He's just laying on a bed of ochre. So like, he's not part of, it was just whatever, for whatever reason, we may never know, but there's a whole lot of different, I think the two elongated ones from a site called 16AB that we surveyed many years ago. I think those 2 elongated skull people round about the same age, brother and sister, I'd imagine, and both seem to have died at the same time. Might have been a sacrificial death. I'm not saying that because it doesn't actually really come up in Australia, that sort of thing, but it's just ironic that they've both got elongated crania and they've also seemed to have died. They're in the same burial. There's cave burials where, there's a lot of people that have died in that region for some reason. There's just one person in it that's in basically a bark canoe, just wrapped up in bark, and it comes from a community of over 10,000 people dying in that region, over a period of time. So it's definitely happens, yeah. And then there's just the common burial, which, if you want to call it that, the common burial where it's still sad, and it's like, we've seen burials where she's died giving birth, so the fetus is still in her womb. It's just sitting right at the passage where she's died giving birth, and there's all sorts of things.
It's actually a historic observation by a white person of babies being buried with high status men, which I've actually published. If you didn't, one of my obscure papers.
Yeah.
And this was in West Wyalong in about 1845, and it was a young girl whose family owned the station, or had taken the land over, and she later in life wrote her autobiography and with her experiences with Aboriginal people. And she, one of her jobs as sort of 12, 13, 14-year-old was to take food down to the Aboriginal camp of Aboriginal people who were working with the station. And so she got to know them, and she knew the language, and she knew the kids. And she said, she gives a description of when the chief died and visiting, going down to the hut where he was ill, and then he died. And then she says, and I was at the funeral and I saw this myself. She said, when he died, he was buried with 4 babies who had died and whose mothers had been carrying them around on slings, waiting until an important man died so they could be buried with him. And it's a really, really detailed account.
Yeah, that's right. They do.
It's the kind of thing kids see and women write down, not the males.
Yeah.
If you're interested, it's in the paper I wrote on for the Women in Archaeology conference back in 1990.
And what was the reason for that?
For to protect them in the afterlife,
Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah. There's a lot of that happening, and it's also in the afterlife. There's like the Brett hands of, say, Gippsland, where they just have an ancestor's hand, and it's mummified, and they're rubbing fat into it all the time. They're wearing it around there like a necklace, and then apparently it goes like this when there's warnings for, you know, we're a spiritual people, you know, like we do our maths. That's yeah, but constantly there was a bag of fat. You had a fat bag with it, and you preserved it by rubbing or duck fat or whatever it was constantly into it, and it's like silk. It looks like a silk hand. But look, this is death always seems to rise up in every culture. But the thing is I think between being born and the death is what Mildura needs to get, is the living space, is all that area in between, and start really celebrating that more so than the born celebration or the death, sorrow and celebration, is you've got all this space to play with instead of just going from one extent to the other extent. And that's our playground. And I don't mean playground as in treat it like a little funny game thing. It's like it's a learning, and it's very serious, and it's also very helpful. And if you want to do joint things, that space in between being born and dying is one for a better ground, the playground that we need to go in and dive in and not be scared, because there's no reason to. And I think my message, we must be getting out of time, aren't we? Yeah. I think my message for this would be is not to be scared to have an opinion, because I think it's, and I don't mean just go up and yell at an Aboriginal community meeting, but to be able to voice your opinion as a person, rather than feeling like this isn't nice. We've got stuff in our area that we really need to look after ourselves, right? And that's important, but it's also...
You should be getting all the help you need to do that.
Well, the thing is this is where my brain just locks. We have in this community, right? And I've been for a few communities like those that have travelled and have been. You couldn't ask for more government support in a community like Mildura. You've got a government agency for walking across the road. No, I'm serious. You know, we've got more Aboriginal services than you can pay, and we always have. You know, and there's scholarships and there's things. It's about getting out of this layer. And our people, as you know, and I'm not saying we're very bright, but if we keep going down this road, right, you're going to wear out our Aboriginal people. You can only take so much, and you're going to wear yourselves out. You need a new song. We need a new song to sing.
It's the grassroots level thing that needs to be changing.
I'm on my 30th year of native title in northwest Victoria, and I am bored to the back of my teeth and beyond. You know, I'm seriously bored. You know, and I mean that sincerely, but getting away from self, going back into community, which is where we need to be, is I think that it's not to start, because you have got some of the most, in the non-Aboriginal community, you could not ask for a better support in a community. People that I've known for a long time, I couldn't ask for a better support system out of the non-Aboriginal community. Understanding, empathy, going forward. You couldn't ask for anything more. And these are, it's like we're just spinning our wheels. And so it's not the start. We've already been on this journey. It's about, we've been on this journey for a long time. Bob said, Mark, I haven't seen you since 1988 today, you know.
And then Mark was working in a school that I was at, and the difference it made, the eyes it opened. And I just wanted to ask the question, you know, I've been in education for a long time, and although I retired, I'm still involved in schools, and I see some great things happening. Certainly it's on, I know, but the school curriculum now looks quite seriously, includes Indigenous studies for everyone.
When I went to school, we weren't told the truth.
No,
No.
We were told,
but they are
different
told the truth. And there's some,
They,
not all schools, but there are some fantastic things happening in some schools. And I think that that's where lots has to happen for the next generation. It's hard to change people's attitudes, but children seeing it, experiencing it, and knowing it, and being involved with people like yourself and videos in schools and so on. I think that's our hope.
I think with the old people and the new people, wouldn't say I sit somewhere in the middle. What we've got to be very careful about is like the river can flow any way it wants, you know, and things do change over time, right? They do change over time, but as long as some things don't get lost and people make up Aboriginal Australia going forward, you know, like they fit into the today. There's the living culture, and then there's the past culture, and I just have some concerns personally about how that actually manifests itself at the end of the day. For instance, if you've got everybody in charge that wants to I don't know, blow their nose every 10 minutes, you're going to have a society that blows their nose every 10 minutes. That's what I'm saying, if that makes sense. So it really depends on how you guide your community, and I think we're well versed in doing so. I really do. I think we're well versed in doing so. Like I said, I think Mildura is something unique, and I don't say that because it's my hometown. I think it's got something unique with all the people that it supports it, and the Aboriginal community itself. You know, like Sonia Hodge, you know, she acknowledges she's not from here, but what an asset to our community. You know, I've got a brother who I seen today, Peter Peterson. He said, I was coming out of the chemist, and he said, "Hey Mark, what are you doing?" And I go, "Hey Pete, what are you doing?" He's actually pulled up in the centre plantation. "Where are you going?" I go, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to give a talk." And he goes, "What about?" And I said, "You." You know, and it is about him. It is about people like Pete. You know, he belongs in this community. He acknowledges that, you have to ask Pete that, but I think he comes slightly outside of these boundaries. But whether he does or he doesn't, he comes into this community. Let's say he doesn't, right? Let's say he doesn't, for hypothetical, because I won't speak on behalf of Peter. It's his business, yeah? But what an asset. You know, he's my brother. I've known him since I was at primary school. You know, when I was first at Mildura Centre, he was the one that came up and looked after me when I was a kid at primary school. I don't know if his parents said to him, "There's a little kid down there, he's just coming in because I was a couple of years late from out the bush, you look after him," whatever it was. But when I went in there, I went in the playground, and he was a year older than me. He grabbed me and he said, "You playing with me." You know, that's a long time ago now, and that's my community. This is our community.
Can I ask you a question, personal question? When are you going to write your reminiscences or your autobiography? Because we're clearly just touching the surface here of your experiences and friends and feeder and so on. Write it down, write it all down.
What now? No, Janet, thank you. Yeah. Actually, when I'm on the houseboat and I have free time. Yeah.
Just get a tape recorder and talk into it. And
Yeah, well, it's really.
Get somebody to type it.
Yeah, well, one day, I don't know what it'd be in it. It'd be, things like, I don't know. Yeah, it's good. Been very fortunate, like working at the, the state level, the state manager in true roles and state heritage advisor at the museum. My own community, what I learned here, nurtured by people, and if we don't nurture.
How ever frustrating as I was identifying with a lot of the things you were saying about the frustrations of how decades go by, and it's difficult to see. There is change, but not fast enough. But this has been a.
Yeah, I just don't know how. I don't know how to gauge change. I don't know how to gauge it. Yeah.
That revolutionised knowledge and study and attitudes to Aboriginal past history, archaeology. From the sort of the days of Tyndale, where everything was slotted into the European system, and there's like an add-on had to be part of that. People like you, me, quite a few, our colleagues, we should actually be recording our experiences.
Yeah. Well, Mulvaney, what comes to my mind when Mulvaney was there and he got a date back and it went 12,500 years, and he was sitting there at the site years ago, 12,500 years ago.
The famous story was Mulvaney is when he was up at Kenneth Cave.
That's what
and radiocarbon dating had first come in. And this is a long time ago, there were telegrams. And he sent the sample down and they sent up a result by telegram of 16,000 years. And he sent a telegram back saying, "Can I check this? It seems there's a typo." Couldn't be that obvious.
Mark, how did you find growing up in Mildura? How did you?
Oh, just exquisite. Like, seriously exquisite.
You didn't have any problems with racial stuff or anything like that?
Oh, well, the colour of my skin, like I get to go incognito. I've been at places almost like a Ku Klux Klan event and and it's really quite interesting. But having said that, everybody at my primary school, like Peter and that, they all knew I was an Aboriginal family, and so tech school, and so I sort of had a bit of reverse racism, where you're not really black, but they knew I was black. Like we grew up when all the Aboriginal families knew each other. Like there's the Clarks, and contributed to this community. Maria Clark, her artwork is just world standard. And then her brother who passed, dear friend of that, and the loss. That's how I grew up in this community. Like when the family loses something like that, and something so beautiful, that hurts. The racism, I think, in many ways has got more so to a degree, but it's how you funnel that racism, because what I'm saying before is what sits, the support mechanisms and the empathy and the people like such as yourselves. You're not low in numbers in this town. There is so many people that aren't racist, and they're really ready to contribute. How did I find growing up here? It was exquisite. It was absolutely exquisite. Like the football, the sport. Just being a kid, with all your mates and just riding your bike and, just normal, I suppose.
I lived and worked at Deakin for quite a while. We all got on out there.
Yeah.
This is back in the 70s.
Yeah.
There was no problems.
Well, what do you expect?
Yeah, I know.
Treads, Sandman panel vans, boob tubes, good rock and roll, I think we overthink too much. Like we're constantly narrowing down how to fix it rather than just living it, And Derton, we used to go out to Derton all the time. Like one of my dearest brothers comes from Derton, you know, a white fella. And he knew more about how Aboriginal people lived like in a community than I did. And I was the Aboriginal person, you know, and he's a dear friend today, absolute dear friend. So I think, look, it was, well, you know, look, the Greeks, the Italians were getting it back then as well, you know, and then everyone was getting it, but it was a community, and that's why I think we're a special community, Mildura, and region-wise, yeah. And it's not like, the other thing is there's a lot of Aboriginal families here that aren't doing real well. I know for a fact. They are not doing well at all, you know. And I don't know whether you just put it down to life. There's a lot of non-Aboriginal people that aren't doing well, you know. And it's seriously, it's like, you know, if you were lucky enough to get in this life to have, like my grandmother, that look that she had on her face, she wore that for so many years. And it's really, it's just because she wanted recognition of her people, yeah? That's all she wanted, and that was it. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about doing a native title settlement. She actually doesn't want the money. And that's passed down to generations. It's passed down. Our rule is that we don't want money. We want to be involved in the community. You know, we don't want $50 million settlement for native title. We want to be able to, you know, do agreements with people, businesses, and celebrate and be a part of, get on the front foot, you know, get on the front foot. And that's really important to us.